Hello and welcome to the Middle of Culture. I am one of your hosts, Eden.
And I'm your other host, Peter.
And this is episode, I don't know what number it is, so starting off real strong.
I want to say it's 15.
I want to say it's somewhere.
Check right now.
It's mid-teens. I was going to guess 14 or 15. But here we
15. X-Men Last Stand was 14. That glorious
15.
movie of the movie.
15. We can almost get our driver's license.
Hey, in Idaho, you'd already have it.
Well, there you go. I mean, in Iowa, you would too. Yeah. Only to drive on your farm. You can't have other people in the vehicle with you, but you can get your driver's license to drive around your farm at like 13. It's absurd.
That is funny. I think at 14 and a half in Idaho is when you can get your learner's permit. And then at 15 or something like that, you can have your driver's license, but it is still sort of not a full driver's license. There's still a lot of restrictions on everything and
sure
when you can be driving and who can be in the car with you and all that kind of stuff. And then that gradually loosens up over time. I don't know. I didn't get my driver's license in Idaho, and I should remember because I have had 3 children get their driver's licenses in Idaho, but I don't remember.
It happens. No judgment for me.
I mean, there's way more important things for me to be thinking about since I don't have anyone getting one for another couple years.
And then once he does, you never have to think about it again ever.
That is for sure.
Nice. So this week, we're going to be talking about a topic that I think will be really fun. But before we do that, Peter and I were chatting before we started the call that we wanted to have our Marvel check-in because apparently that's a thing that has happened to us, is that we are slowly but surely becoming a Marvel-centric podcast. But I don't think that's permanent, and I don't think it'll stay that way. But we're both Marvel fans. We both like Marvel comics. Those are the superhero comics we both are the most interested in. And let's be real, the MCU is the dominant cultural force in American pop culture. And has been for almost a decade at this point. So it's everywhere. It's omnipresent. We can't escape it.
And, it's kind of funny. You think back to early on in the course of the MCU, and we would have, a movie here and there. And if there were 2 a year, it was like, whoa, that's a big deal. And good grief. I mean, we've become, we talk about Marvel as much as we do these days because it is difficult to get away from it. I mean, we've had
a glut.
A couple movies, we've had multiple series, and so it seems like there's almost always something Marvel to be talking about. And I'm sure that Disney loves that fact.
Oh, the SEO is off the charts. They're loving it. But I mean, think about just this year. It's 2022. It's almost August, so we're a little over halfway through the year. We had the back half of Hawkeye. We had Moon Knight. We had Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. We had Ms. Marvel. And we had, just recently, Thor Love and Thunder. We still have upcoming next month, She-Hulk starts. We've got Wakanda Forever coming this fall. We've got the Groot show coming this fall.
I think that's actually starting before Miss Marvel. I mean, before She-Hulk.
Is it? Well, I'll tell you which one I'm not going to watch, and that's anything dealing with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So I'm free from that.
You're not going to be watching the holiday special as well.
No. I mean, I will read reviews, and if the reviews are like this is indispensable, maybe, but probably not.
Yeah.
I just don't. I'm not a James Gunn fan. It's fine if you are. I'm not. It's fine.
I don't know James Gunn really that much outside of the 2 Guardians films. I never did see The Suicide Squad. I did not see Peacemaker because I am so struggling with getting interested in things that DC is and Warner are putting out. And I don't know anything about James Gunn's previous work because I just haven't ever seen it that I can think of. So, I liked the first Guardians movie. I didn't really like the second one. I think we mentioned that and kind of talked about those when we were doing our bracket. So, I guess I'm curious to see what happens to it next. But honestly, one of my favorite things about Thor Love and Thunder, without getting into any spoilers, was the fact that the Guardians weren't in it for very long. I was worried we were going to have to put up with them for at least the first third of the movie, and I was so happy that it was far, far less than that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were gone by like minute 10. It was great.
Yep.
It was cameo.
It
was perfect. But anyway, so quick thoughts on Thor Love and Thunder. Again, not spoilers because it just came out, but first impressions, what did you think?
Well, I think I described it to you thusly when we were texting about it. And I kind of said, where I felt that Ragnarok was an MCU movie directed by Taika Waititi, this felt like a Taika Waititi movie that happened to be in the MCU. And I guess what I mean with that is it really, in seeing Love and Thunder and knowing that he was one of the principal writers on Love and Thunder and everything, I kind of look at Ragnarok and go, I think I liked it a lot better because he was a little bit more restrained, because he wasn't completely set free on it.
Yeah.
I think that Love and Thunder is a fun movie. It's funny. I laughed quite a bit. I laughed too much, I felt, because I felt like the excess of humor took away some of the emotional moments that they were going for. And with the story that they're telling, there really should have been some strong emotional moments. And I think that they tried for them, and sometimes it sort of succeeded, but not as much as I would have liked, because I felt like there was a little too much focus on the ridiculous and the over-the-top humor side of things.
For sure. I feel similarly. While I think being even colder on the film, it really didn't work for me. I left the theater going, well, that was a movie that I saw and spent money to see. Thankfully, I went to a matinee showing, so I didn't spend too much money on it. But it was enough that I was like, well, shucks. But yeah, I think that, I guess I'm just not as big of a Taika Waititi fan as I thought I was, because when I think about the movies of his that I really like, the only one that I can think of that he was really intimately involved with at but just about every level is Hunt for the Wilder People. What We Do in the Shadows was largely a Jermaine Clement project that had Waititi directing it, but it was Jermaine Clement who was the primary writer and creative director of the show, or of the movie, and that I think is impeccable. And I love the TV show as well. What We Do in the Shadows is splendid, but I don't know. I'm just I kind of feel like I'm burnt out on the kitsch that is Taika Waititi. If I had, yeah. I think that this is not I don't think this is a common sentiment, but between it and Doctor Strange, I much prefer Doctor Strange.
Interesting.
If I was going to watch one right now, I would much rather watch Doctor Strange again than Thor 4 again.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I'm definitely the other, kind of reverse those two. And most of that is because I don't know. I feel like so much of Love and Thunder was just goofy and silly that while it was excessive, it didn't pull me out of the movie, because that's kind of what the movie mostly was. And sure. I felt like some of the goofy Sam Raimi stuff that he does, which I'm again, the only Sam Raimi stuff I've ever seen is the original Spider-Man trilogy. So I'm not I don't do horror movies, even if they're like comedy. Like that is not something that interests me. And so I think those aspects of Doctor Strange would put it a little bit behind Thor, Love and Thunder. But whereas Ragnarok is, again, right up there at the very top of my all-time favorite Marvel movies. And as we discussed previously, in my opinion, the most rewatchable of all the Marvel movies. Both Doctor Strange and Thor, Love and Thunder are pretty much squarely in the mid to lower half of the teens for me, if I were to rank all of the Marvel movies. So I do think, like you said, I think I liked it more than you did, but I would have Love and Thunder ahead of Multiverse of Madness. And I think, it sounds like you would probably have those two switched in order somewhere in there. Sure.
I mean, and I think as we, alluded to when we talked about Multiverse of Madness a little bit, I'm a much bigger fan of horror, especially horror comedy, especially Sam Raimi's horror comedy, because I could watch Evil Dead literally any second of any day. If you said, do you want to watch an Evil Dead movie with me right now? I would say, hot damn, let's pop some popcorn. I love those movies. And so it just vibed with me a lot more. But yeah, I did not care for Love and Thunder very much, and the further away I get from it, the less I liked it. But that's neither here nor there. Another thing to talk about really quick. Oh, go ahead.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is I think that is one of the things that happens when you start to get so many entries into something.
Yep.
It becomes, and again, I love the Marvel stuff. I'm a huge MCU fan. It is for me because I don't consume that much movies or TV, that kind of stuff. It is, I guess, probably like 85% of the stuff I consume, with the exception, honestly, of things that you and I look at, read, watch, whatever, for this. And so even then, I kind of, I came out of Love and Thunder and I'm like, yeah, I want to see it again, but probably just when it comes out on digital. Like, I don't feel any reason to go back to the theaters to see it again. So. Yeah.
And I also feel like, and this is a bigger problem, and I think it ties into the other things we wanted to talk about. San Diego Comic-Con just happened. They had their big, Hall H presentation, which if you've never been to San Diego Comic-Con, going to a Hall H presentation is a trip. I don't necessarily recommend it, especially those big ones, because you got to wait for like 5 hours just to get a seat. But it is pretty cool to be in the room when all that stuff is released.
I bet.
It's been a few years since I've been to SDCC, but I should go again. You know what I should do? I should do for you what I've done for my other friends. I should submit a paper to the Comic Arts Conference that is concurrent with and a part of San Diego Comic-Con, because then I get 2 free tickets, baby.
Oh, yes. Yes, you should.
And then we could go together. And then you could be my +1 because I did that. As long as
I don't have to cosplay. Yes, I'm down for it.
No, you don't have to cosplay at all.
I know.
My first year I presented on one of the both times I've gone, I've presented on one of the chapters of my dissertation before I had finished it. And then I took a friend, Darren, the first year, and my friend Dominique the second year. And it was just a lot of fun to have the chance to see some of those smaller things in Comic-Con, because like a lot of those smaller conferences or smaller presentations, not that many people go to, and they were some of the most fun things that were there, in my opinion. And like the first one that I was with, the panel was me and Trina Robbins. That doesn't mean anything to you, but if you were into comics, it would mean something to you. She is one of the most important figures in 60s and 70s independent comics. She created women's comics, which was a very influential like indie like comics with an X publication. She created Vampirella, the character.
Oh wow.
Who I'm sure you would recognize. And she's like become this really respected comic scholar. And here I was, this like little guy who had not really, I'd never published anything. I'd never presented at a conference of that size. I had really only presented at like grad student or smaller language conferences at that point, because my background is in Spanish. And so this was my first big conference like that. And the whole panel, the other person who was supposed to be on the panel with us ended up not being able to come. So it was just me and Trina Robbins.
Wow.
And that was, that was amazing. And then I got to meet her and we got to hang out for a little bit afterwards. And then every time I would see her during the next few days, because I presented on the first day of 4, she would like wave and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And
that
so
is
like,
super cool.
Yeah, so that's the sort of things that you can do when you're, and also, you're there presenting, and most of the attendees are the other scholars who are there to present their work, but then there's just a lady dressed like the sexy nurses from Silent Hill, and you're just like, hey, you and the Pyramid Head cosplayers should sit together. What are you doing, Silent Hill cosplayers? You should be walking around the hall together. But it's very fun. We should go. I should submit, and maybe we can go next summer. I'll keep that in mind.
Totally. I think that's a great idea. I'd be down for it.
But anyway, Hall H, their big presentation, we found out Phase 4's done, baby. At the end of this year, Phase 4 is finished. Guess what? Phase 4 did not have a through line.
No, it really didn't.
And I think that it shows both in public perception of the properties and also in the properties themselves. There was a lot of meandering, a lot of not knowing where to go, I think. And I think part of that was just the glut of it, especially the last 18 months or so. Once Disney Plus came out and they were like, we're going to shove a show in your eyes every 2 to 3 months. It just felt like almost too much, and none of it felt focused or directed. So I think it'll be really interesting to see now that they're like declaring phase 4 is finished. Here is literally the plan of everything in phase 5, which was a lot. Yeah. I'm interested to see if they start to develop that through line again, and like, because the threat of Thanos was always there from the end of Avengers 1 until Infinity War when he showed up.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I wonder if, we know that Kang is going to appear. We already saw a version of who will become Kang in Loki. And we know he's going to be the primary antagonist of Ant-Man and the Wasp 3. And clearly the through line, because they also announced the two of the movies in phase 6, one of which is called Avengers the Kang Dynasty, which is the worst name for a movie I've ever heard of.
I don't know. I can think of a few worse.
I know. Solo 180 Days in Sodom is worse. Also a worse movie, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I don't know. Marvel. What did you think of Ms. Marvel? Wrapped up. Well, what did you think?
So I do want to say something really quick before that. And this is just a thought I've had, because I have heard and seen a lot of that reaction about what's the unifying story of phase 4. And that really hasn't bothered me that much, the lack of it. And I guess it's because I look back at phase 1 and I go, we didn't have a unifying story really in phase 1. And I feel like, at least the way it has come across to me, phase 4 has been the phase 1 of this second chunk. So,
sure.
If we go back and look at the things that were in phase 1, there was a lot less of them because of that glut that you mentioned. But I mean, I was
just going to say, it was 5 movies.
Yeah, exactly. And then capped off with the Avengers. So we have a lot more. And I think that makes the lack of a through line feel more significant than, at least to me, it really is. But I am curious to see them start to weave it together.
But I feel like there was a through line in phase 1 because of the signature post-credit sequence. Here is Samuel L. Jackson saying, "Let me tell you, Tony Stark, about the Avengers Initiative." So I think that there was that through line actually in phase 1 that I don't think we've gotten in phase 4, even though phase 1 was building up a lot of brand new characters that you maybe have never seen on the big screen before. There had been a Thor made for TV movie that was a spinoff of the Incredible Hulk, and it was bad. So like people had never seen Thor on the movie screen before. But they knew that Avengers was a thing that was coming down the pipeline because of that post-credit scene in the very first movie.
That's true.
So
that's true.
I don't know. We'll see.
But back to your question about Ms. Marvel. I thought overall, I found Ms. Marvel to be delightful. I thought that the villains of the show, whether you want it to be the clandestine or you want it to be damage control, were by far the weakest part of the whole thing.
100%.
But I loved the character, and I loved Kamala's interactions with her friends and family, and I loved the way that her story is really steeped in Pakistani culture. All of that stuff completely overshadowed the weakness of the antagonists of the show. And I loved it. And it is, I'm pretty much sure that okay, I know this is going to be controversial because I know that there's a whole lot of WandaVision stans out there. And that's all right. I forgive you, and I hope you'll forgive me. But, for me, it is either Miss Marvel or Hawkeye as my 2 favorite Marvel Disney Plus things for very, very different reasons.
I'd agree.
But I think that they're the 2 strongest. I think that they're the 2 overall most consistent, and they introduce us to new characters who I am so excited to see more of. I want to see more Kamala Khan. I want to see more Kate Bishop so much. And so I think that's why those two are my favorite, and depends on the day, and it depends how tired I'm feeling. If I'm feeling real tired dad energy, then Hawkeye's going to be my number one. And if I'm feeling a little bit less tired dad energy, then Miss Marvel's going to be my number one. But it was a delight. And I say that as someone who really knew nothing about the character other than playing the first couple hours of that Square Enix Avengers game. I knew who she was, and I played some of that game, and I didn't really like it a lot, so I didn't play more of it. But so I came into it really not knowing anything about her, no real preconceptions, and I absolutely loved it. What about you?
I agree. I found it charming. The cast was so good. The whole cast just about was so good. And it made me like a lot of the characters who I didn't care for as much from the comics. Like Bruno's always there, but Bruno I felt has always been kind of the weakest link in Kamala's cast in the comics. I've never really cared about Bruno as a character, but I really liked the actor playing Bruno, and it made me care a lot more about Bruno as a character. Nakia was great. I expected her to be great. Iman Vellani is just so much fun to watch because you can tell how much fun she's having.
Yes.
I really liked, again, I enjoy these comics a lot. I think that they're really solid superhero comics. They're the kind of thing that by and large you can pick up as not being a person who's read a lot of comics and mostly enjoy yourself, even in the ones where it has uncomfortable crossovers. I still think that G. Willow Wilson did a really good job of keeping it as contained as she could in the strictures of a larger superhero universe. But I also think that the show did a lot of things well that I was worried. I don't know how you do that on the big screen because, spoiler alert, the big bad of the first arc of the comic Ms. Marvel is a clone of Thomas Jefferson in a bird body, like a large human-sized chicken person body.
Oh my gosh, now I have to read this.
You should. It's really good. And Adrian Alfona is the artist for the first arc or two, and he's one of the greatest artists to work in comics. So the art is just incredible. It pops off the page. But yeah, I thought to myself, I sure hope that they don't have that villain on the big screen. And they didn't, and it was better for it.
Yeah.
But they did tie in a lot of... They did still tie in a lot of really great stuff. I thought that the changes that it made to the way that Kamala dealt with her parents was also really good, while still keeping it in that kind of structure of them being immigrant parents, them being a little more, concerned about her safety, a little more conservative in what they want her to be able to do with her friends and things like that. They were still able to capture that, but making you feel really warmly for the parents and understanding where they're coming from.
Yeah.
I just thought it was really good. I really enjoyed myself.
Yep, I did too. So.
And then one last Marvel thing before we get on, after half the podcast is Marvel talk. The Black Panther Wakanda Forever trailer also came out of Hall H. What are your first impressions on viewing that trailer, Peter?
So, confession, and I already confessed this to you, and I meant to rectify this prior to recording, and time got away from me. I have only seen it on my phone, on Instagram through Marvel's official page, and Instagram being the glorious, wonderful Meta Corporation app that it is, aka steaming pile of doggy doo-doo. Even though I made the trailer go full screen, it still would not allow me to rotate my phone into landscape. So I watched a 16:9, or even perhaps a more of a whatever the film aspect ratio is, 21 something. I watched that in the middle of my phone, with my phone in portrait orientation.
So like
my opinions
approximately
are
an inch by 3 inches.
Correct. So that's the caveat before I say that I don't really know what to think about it. I am excited. In part, I really am curious what they're going to do, obviously, with the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman. I thought that, and right now the second, like her name was literally on my tongue. And then when I went to say it, it was gone. The actor who plays his mother,
Angela Bassett.
Angela Bassett, thank you. I thought that the little bit of the speech that we got, I don't know where it's going to be given, I thought that was incredibly powerful. The way her voice kind of breaks as she's talking about how she's lost her whole, she's a queen of the most powerful country on earth, and she's lost everything. And so I think that we're going to see some interesting things. I'm very fascinated to see Namor. I think Namor is one of those characters that people don't realize how long he has been around in Marvel,
Oh, for sure. I mean, people don't realize that he's one of the original, before Marvel existed as a company, in the 40s. He was punching Nazis with Captain America and the Human Torch and Bucky in the 1940s.
Yeah. And, and I'm sure that many people know this already, but for those who don't, he predates Aquaman. And so he is not a ripoff of Aquaman.
Aquaman's a ripoff of him.
That is correct. I love the fact that, and again, this has always been one of the things I have appreciated about the MCU, is their willingness to stick to the comics when they feel that it fits the story they want to tell, but stray from it when they feel that that also fits the story they want to tell. And so I'm super excited to see how does Atlantis, being more of what appears to be like an Aztec type origin, play into this, as opposed to what people generally think of Atlantis. So I'm excited.
I think they're going more Mayan than Aztec, but that is not important to you. Just because of the glyphs. I looked at the glyphs and I was like, oh, those are Mayan glyphs. Those aren't Aztec glyphs.
I couldn't
but
see
the headdress does. The headdress does look more Aztec. It's probably going to be a mess. Anyone who is like a pre-Columbian scholar is probably going to walk out of that being like, those assholes did a real number on actual peoples. But I too am excited as a person who does study pre-Columbian Latin America. I'm still pretty excited. And I love that they cast, a Mexican man of indigenous descent to be Namor, who looks like he is also like an indigenous American,
Yeah.
Also, I texted this to you. Good,
yes, you did.
Good Lord, Tenoch Huerta is so hot in that trailer. He looks so hot. People gonna be thirsting like they were for M'Baku the first time, because I was on Twitter. I know everyone was going to do Black Panther, and they were like, "This movie's so great. Killmonger would be hotter if he wasn't covered with all those scars." The real thirst was all for M'Baku. It was all for him. So I think we're gonna get similar thirst for Tenoch Huerta as Namor. I'm excited for it. I think that I hope they pull it off. I hope it's a good movie. I was not excited to see Martin Freeman there again because screw the CIA. And lastly, the last thing I'll say before we move on, I love that two of the widest dudes in comic books, the two fishmen, are now played by a dude who is Polynesian and a dude who is Mexican.
Yeah, very true.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Screw bigots. It's awesome. Let's go.
So the final thing I want to say is, sure, screw the CIA. I'm okay with that. But I actually really, really like Martin Freeman as an actor. So I'm looking forward to seeing him again. Here's my question for you before we move on.
Okay.
Who do you think dons the Black Panther suit? Who is going to be the next Black Panther?
I was talking with Cassie about this beforehand because we see at the very end of the trailer a shot of someone in a Black Panther suit from behind, just the lower part. I think that your two biggest contenders are Nakia and Shuri, and my gut says it'll be Shuri, but my heart says it should be Nakia.
Interesting.
What do you think?
I don't know, because I was leaning towards the same two, both Shuri and Nakia, and again was leaning towards Shuri, and perhaps only because I know that Shuri has donned the mantle of Black Panther at times, or at a time at least in the past.
She has.
I wonder, and I don't want to, it's not something I want to get deep into because I don't know all the details, but I know that there was some controversy with Letitia Wright and some anti-vax comments and things like that. And so I don't know if there's going to be any hesitation to use her and put her in that role going forward. I've heard of some speculation that there may be, which has got a number of people leaning toward Nakia. I don't know. I think we're just going to have to see. I really, really don't know where they're going to go with it. And that actually is one of the things that I find exciting.
Actually, you know who it should be? Angela Bassett.
She would be awesome.
Let's put the queen. Let's put the queen in the suit.
Yep.
But, we'll see. November. We'll find out. So, now on to the topic at hand. 30 minutes in. Our Marvel Minute turned into Marvel 30 minutes, but I think that's okay.
I think so too.
Because we have a looser topic for today. We did not, either of us, we didn't pick a specific piece of media for both of us to go over before doing this because, we were both getting ready. You were traveling. I was getting ready to travel. It's been busy with summer and all sorts of things. So I was like, let's have kind of a breather while we still get to record and chat with one another and talk about something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And that is, I want to talk about post-apocalyptic media and post-apocalyptic cultural production, but I kind of wanted to use the Fallout games as kind of a lens for us to talk a little bit about post-apocalyptic media. What do we think of that genre? What do we think is generative or exciting about it? And what do we think is some of the pitfalls of post-apocalyptic genre? And maybe some of our favorite examples of it, both in video games. Obviously, we're going to start talking about video games, but also in books, movies, whatever else we wanted to talk about. Yeah. So, I think we mentioned this a little bit, but I would like to get it on the recording and talk a little bit more about it. What's your relationship with the Fallout games, the Fallout series of games? What have you played? What have you avoided? And kind of what is your read on the series as a whole?
So I have played to completion the original Fallout. I have played a fair bit of Fallout 2, though it was many years ago. I dabbled around with Fallout Tactics, which was sort of a little bastardized side project that I don't think was made by anybody who was involved in the first two Fallout games. And then I have started up on a number of occasions Fallout 3, and I fell into sort of the same trap that I would fall into every time I would think about starting up Skyrim. And that is that you start thinking about those games and then you start going, well, maybe I should add a mod. And then figuring out how you're going to mod the game turns into a much bigger part of your life than actually playing the game. And then I get burned out and frustrated at the mods. And so then I stop. And Fallout 4, I own just like all of them. And I have never even started it up. Fallout New Vegas, same thing. Own it. I know that from a story standpoint, I am sure that Fallout New Vegas is going to be the best because Obsidian makes really good story-based RPGs, and I like what they do.
Often, yeah.
I just haven't gotten into it, and so it's one of those series that I actually, it's on the docket for me to get into Fallout 3. It's kind of, once I finally wrap up what I'm doing in Skyrim, I think there's a decent chance that Fallout 3 may be the next thing I try and tackle. I just haven't done it yet.
Here's what I'll say. Just play it vanilla. Don't worry about mods. Just play it vanilla.
I don't know if I can.
Especially for your first time. Maybe a graphics overhaul because this is a game from 2008 or whenever the hell. But like...
Yeah. I got to make it look a little bit better because it looks rough.
I mean, yeah, it's a little rough. But also I find some comfort and some joy in that roughness. Yeah, so I have played, not to completion, but I have played every game in the Fallout series with one exception, which is the Xbox original Xbox book or game Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. I never played it.
Oh yeah, I forgot that one existed.
That's because no one's ever played it. And also you play as a member of the Brotherhood of Steel. And do you know who's the worst? Sorry, fans of the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel is the worst. I hate those guys. Sorry, Fallout 3, for trying to make me like the Brotherhood of Steel. Just because you made them an offshoot and put a non-monster in charge of it, it's still the Brotherhood of Steel and they still suck. But anyway, so I've played all of them. It's been a while. I am not very... I dislike the combat in Fallouts 1 and 2. I really dislike the way that turn-based combat works in those games. And I'm a kind of person who I can get into a tactics game. I played a shit ton of BattleTech earlier this year, and I loved it because that game rules. But, you know, I can't make the turn-based combat in the two original Fallout games of Fallout Tactics really jive with my brain, even though I've played them quite a bit. I usually have ended up cheating at least part of the way through. Been like, time to go into the editor, give myself 999 points in VATS. Sorry, everything, you're dead. But, you know, I like these games. I've played Fallout 3 to completion at least 3 or 4 times. Fallout 3 is the reason I own an Xbox 360. I went to visit this was when I was dating my now wife. I went to visit her over a Thanksgiving break when she went to visit her family, and I went to go meet her whole family. And I was sleeping in the basement on a blow-up mattress of her parents' house. And down there, they had a big TV and had an Xbox hooked up to it. And so when I couldn't sleep because I was nervous about being at this girl who I wanted to marry's house, I booted up Fallout 3 and started playing it on her little brother's Xbox 360 with his blessing. And I really became enamored with it. So I knew that I wanted to get an Xbox so that I could play Fallout 3. So that was why I bought an Xbox 360 for the first time. And so I've played it a lot. And I've played New Vegas quite a few times. I really think New Vegas is easily the best in the series. While, you know, all of these games have huge caveats that come with me liking them. But I also think that I like Fallout 4 more than I think a lot of people did, for a lot of reasons. And I have recently been spending... it's been a while since I booted it up, but when I got my Xbox Series X, I have Game Pass. Guess what's on Game Pass? Literally every Fallout game. So I decided to play 76 because I had heard that when it launched, it was extremely bad, but that it had kind of recuperated itself over the years as they built a more traditional Fallout feeling experience into it. So I have actually spent, 25, 30 hours in Fallout 76.
Nice.
And it's a mess of a game. I can see why people didn't like it, but there's a lot of things that I think fit really well for when it's taking place in terms of the timeline, that make it that I can kind of recommend it, especially since it's on Game Pass. Just download and play it, and if you don't like it, just delete it. Whatever, who cares?
Yep.
The beauty of Game Pass. But so we've obviously both played a lot of, or a fair amount of these games. The world of Fallout is such that in 2077, World War III culminates in nuclear apocalypse. Everyone's wiped out. Few people survive outside of the vaults that are built by this dystopian company, Vault Tech. But most of the people who are able to survive are in these big underground vaults that then open up, and then they build society out from there. And so I think that there's a lot of things I really like about them in terms of the way that they show how society rebuilds itself, but I also see a lot of problems in the ways that it sees how society rebuilds itself. So again, you've played 1 and 2. What were the kind of vibe that you got from those? Like what did you think about the world as presented in the early entries in the series?
It's an interesting world, and there's a definite aesthetic they're going for, and a definite feeling of, you're kind of a fish out of water because you're, at least in the first one, you're one of these vault dwellers, and you're heading out to try and figure out how to save the rest of the vault. And you find all these, smaller versus some bigger kind of towns, little societies that have built up. And I don't know, I remember it feeling kind of like it was almost sort of a Wild West type situation. Each town kind of felt like it almost felt with that there were times when you were playing like a Wild West sort of cowboy game because of the way the world was put together, with little bits of technology thrown in here and there. But obviously things are, like you said, it's kind of post-apocalyptic. And so there's not nearly as much technology. And again, everything's kind of been pushed back time-wise quite a bit. And that was, I think, kind of the biggest thing that stuck out is this sort of interesting cross between almost like a feeling of the Wild West with the sci-fi elements and the sci-fi tropes that it brought with it.
Yeah, and I also think that there's a big current of retrofuturism that runs through it. Because, a lot of the tech that you see in that series is like retrofuturist, like 1950s-esque tech, even though it is, in the 2070s when the bombs drop. The cars all look like 50s cars. The fashion is 50s fashion. And I do think that a lot of that, here's an interesting thing. A lot of what I think that we perceive as that retrofuturism as wedded so tightly with the Fallout series is because of the Bethesda games.
Okay.
Because, I still think the best part of both Fallout and Fallout 2 are the opening cinematics.
Yeah.
Both of them just are incredible when you see them for the first time, but they have this retrofuturist, the very first one, there's this TV that's on and it's showing commercials for cars that cost $300 million. Here's a robot that you can get to be your home butler, the Mr. Handy. Oh, look, it's our boys in uniform up annexing Canada. And you watch them cap a dude in the back of the head who's just tied up. And then they turn and wave at the camera. Yay, America. So there's a real undercurrent of satire for American exceptionalism and American nostalgia.
Yes.
But then you don't really see that nostalgia anymore in the rest of Fallout. You see the wasteland, you see the bones of the society that existed before, but it's really that level of satire is really only found in that opening cinematic. And the same is true of Fallout 2, where there's a family who's leaving the vault for the very first time and they're watching this training video about what'll happen when they leave the vault, and then the door opens and there's some soldiers there that just gun them down, just perforate them. But again, you don't see it other than that. But then Fallout 3 comes along, and with it comes a change in perspective. We're now in first-person perspective instead of an isometric perspective. And I think that they lean too much into the 50s kitsch and they make it less satirical because it's too much of well, this was pretty cool. For example, both of those opening cinematics for Fallout 1 and 2 feature old 50s ballads. Uh-huh. But that is to heighten the irony, And then it's not you hear those through the rest of the game. The rest of the game has a great ambient, spooky soundtrack that's great to write a dissertation to, because I wrote a lot of my dissertation listening to the Fallout 1 soundtrack because it's spooky and great background and sound.
Nice.
But then you get to Fallout 3. You've got a Pip-Boy on your wrist, and your Pip-Boy has a radio. So you can turn on your radio and listen to approximately 48 minutes worth of great hits from the 50s. And again, I really like these games. I've played them a lot, but I don't turn to those radio stations anymore because it's why would you actually play these songs in 2272, 200 years after the bombs fell? society is just starting to like rebuild itself, which again, that's a whole other question of like, why is society only rebuilding itself 200 years after the fact? I don't think that's how society works. I think that it's a facile understanding of the way that community works. But also, why would you play these old Bing Crosby songs from the 50s? Yeah. Why would you play this racist Danny Kaye song about a guy from the jungle who goes to the city and is scared of all the cars? Like, you know?
And you bring up one of the things that we see in a lot of post-apocalyptic entertainment. Certainly not all of it, but the Fallout games are extremely sort of, they really embody this idea. And that is that the progress of society and humanity and technology just seems to like stall after whatever the apocalyptic scenario was.
Sure.
If we think about the progress that has been made from a technological standpoint in the past 200 years, it is mind-boggling. I mean, it's staggering to think of that progress. And so that's one of the things that kind of rubs me the wrong way, is the fact that we have these games taking place in some cases, a few hundred years after this World War III and this nuclear apocalypse. And it feels like everything has just been held in stasis that whole 200 years. Things have not progressed in a believable or understandable way, because again, you look back and say, all right, I'm sure that there was some damage done, obviously, by this nuclear holocaust. And it did, of course, was going to set things back from a technological standpoint and everything. Yet at the same time, you've got lots of people still alive who have the knowledge necessary to get society back up and running, get technology back and going. And in 200 years, we should be a lot further along than we are. And so that's, I don't know, it kind of strains credulity there and makes me go, this should have happened right after the Holocaust. And then I would believe that this is what the state of this world was like.
And I think this is why I feel more warmly towards the latest two entries in the series than I think a lot of other people do, who really loved 3 and New Vegas especially. A lot of them were turned off by 4 just because I think 4 is really... Part of the thing is 4 is really big. 4 is easily the biggest of the games. But one of the things about 4 is that there is an entire faction, the Institute, which is essentially that universe's version of MIT. And guess what? Of course those assholes survived. And they've been doing weird science shit for 200 years, like maybe making artificial people who they're now using to infiltrate all of the communities outside of the Institute. So, like, that's one of those things where I think that the criticism that you just made has really been dealt with, where they're like, no, there were places where that level of technology continued and has gone in even more advanced and honestly nefarious ways.
Interesting.
So I think that is one of the things that I think is most interesting about Fallout 4 is, you being a person. And the other interesting thing, I know a lot of people didn't like this about Fallout 4, your protagonist is a pre-war person who was frozen in cryo for 200 years.
Uh-huh.
Because one of the things, and this is a thing that came in the later, mostly the Bethesda and later games, is that each of the Vault-Tec vaults had some sort of experiment that they were running. So each of them, had a weird thing that they did. So and this was made retroactive to the earlier games, because the setup of the first game is you need to leave the vault because your water chip has failed.
Yep.
And you find out that a glut of water chips was sent to a different vault, and your vault had one and was built to be defective. In other words, to precipitate the actions of the game. And so you see later on that those Vault-Tec experiments are more and more nefarious and wider ranging. And the one that your character comes from in Fallout 4 was a cryogenic vault. So they lied to you and told you that this was like a sterilization chamber. You climbed into it, and then you woke up 200 years later. which I think is an interesting conceit, because now you are not a person. Fallout 3, they make you a person who had grown up in a vault that supposedly had never opened, and then you leave it. Fallout New Vegas is really interesting in that you're not a person who's ever lived in a vault. You're just like a normal Joe who lives in this world that has existed, and like you were a courier who had a normal job in this normal world. But then in Fallout 4, the conceit is that you are a person from the pre-war world. So when you're coming out and seeing things for the first time, you're like, well, I went to sleep what felt like not an instant ago, and the world was not like this. So I think that's an interesting perspective to have. And then on the other side of that, one of the things that I think works in Fallout 76 is that game explicitly takes place 20 years post the apocalypse. So it is the first, in terms of chronology, it is the very first game, because any of the other ones are at least 100 years in the future. But this one, your vault opens 20 years afterwards, and you're supposed to go back out and repopulate Appalachia. So yeah, everything's a shithole because it's only been 20 years, and most of everyone died. Yours is one of the first vaults to open. So I think that it builds that. How come everything's a mess? How come society hasn't really rebuilt itself far more believably? Because it's only been 200 years as opposed to like 230.
That's definitely interesting.
But so, again, I think that these games are interesting in the way that they build a world, but they also strain a lot of my believability, like we talked about. One of the things that I mentioned, I think, when I talked about wanting to talk about this a little bit, is I had been replaying New Vegas. I really like New Vegas. Again, I would recommend just play it vanilla. It doesn't matter if it looks ugly. Play New Vegas. It's so good. It is probably in my top 10 games of all time, just because I really like it. I've spent a lot of time in it. I really think that the world they build, and again, this is a world that a lot of it is being rebuilt, and you're seeing a lot of development. There is an entire, the new California Republic exists as a functioning society with its own fiat currency that is not the stupid bottle caps that for some reason they're still using 230 years later on the East Coast. But it does a lot to develop what was done in those first two games, because it's back on the West Coast. Well, Nevada, but still closer to the West Coast rather than the East Coast, which is where the Bethesda games have moved the action to. But yeah, I was playing New Vegas, replaying it the other day, and I get to the town of Nipton. And Nipton is a town that has been rebuilt. There's houses everywhere. There's a town hall that is functional, where they have their government. They have working computers in this town hall that the town secretary and the town mayor use. And yet, there are still piles of dirt and debris in the hallways. And it seems to me, if this was a functioning society and a functioning town that you had built, you would say, okay, everyone roll up your sleeves. We're going to take an afternoon and finally clear all the freaking debris out of our town hall.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fit the aesthetic. It doesn't fit the aesthetic that was built, which is everything's a shithole, everything's fallen apart. It's been 200 years. You can't be like that anymore. Just like you said, people would have cleaned it up by now. Yeah. They would have moved the burnt out cars to another place. They wouldn't be sitting in the middle of the street still in a town that's been lived in for over 100 years. They would have moved that stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that there's a lot that narratively hooks me about, especially the Bethesda Fallout games, but aesthetically, there's places where they really fall apart for me.
Yeah.
But so, to kind of wrap up, what are some other post-apocalyptic media that you enjoy, or that you find works for you, or other ones that you also feel are like, well, these are things I like about this, but there are some other huge problems I have with XYZ, piece of media?
So a lot of it really goes back to my childhood to some degree. Our father, I don't know if he still would consider himself, but there was a time when I was young that he was a huge fan of the Mad Max movies. And I remember his excitement when Mad Max 3 was coming out, because it had Tina Turner, who he was also a huge fan of. And so
again, with good reason.
Oh, absolutely. And so those are very, when I think post-apocalyptic, honestly, one of the first things that my brain is going to go to is Mad Max, is the Road Warrior, is that sort of setting, that sort of aesthetic, that sort of vibe. And I have not watched any of those movies in a really long time. And I don't know that I feel the need to watch any of them again at this point in my life. But the idea of a post-apocalyptic world is indelibly linked to Mad Max and those movies. Another one that I liked a lot growing up, and I would like to think that perhaps I have slightly more sophisticated tastes, although I look at some of the things I enjoy and I go, no, you're full of it. You are not. But when I was a kid, I remember loving and I know I'm going to say it wrong according to the author, and I don't care. I will forever say Shannara. I will not say the other way, and I'm going to leave it at that. But I loved those books as I was young, when I was growing up, and I really enjoyed the moment, and I don't remember where it was, but I enjoyed the moment where I realized that these were post-apocalyptic, that some apocalypse had taken place and had put things back, not just 10, 20, 30 years, but had put things back hundreds and hundreds of years. And so now we have a setting that's, swords and sorcery and that sort of thing. And so that's another one of those things that is really linked to post-apocalyptic fiction in my head. And those would probably almost honestly be two of the biggest, most significant entries. Again, my issues that I have with post-apocalyptic fiction is I always feel like, and we already kind of talked about this, but I feel like humanity, and now look, there are a lot of reasons that humanity sucks. But there's also a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of good people, and there are a lot of people who do good things. And I feel like post-apocalyptic fiction tends to really give short shrift to the people in society who are good, who would be good, who would become leaders, who would try and get society back on track. And there's always going to be the dillholes who get in their way and want the power and are just the problem, because we have plenty of those right now, as we can all see without having to look very far. But I do feel like the idea of society picking itself back up and progressing again is always given a little bit of short shrift in a lot of different ways. So what about you? What are other things that really resonate with you?
I feel the same sort of way, that I think that while I have consumed a lot of post-apocalyptic media, that it always leaves me a little cold for the exact thing that you're talking about, that like, I think that, and if you hear me talk about the political state of the world in 2022, you might not believe that I actually feel this way, but ultimately I believe humanity people fundamentally are good at their core. I am not a person who, I'm not a religious person anymore. And part of that is my divorcing myself from the concept of original sin and thinking that we are all fallen and evil. I don't think that about people. I think that people largely are good. It's just that the way that our society is currently structured, the worst of the worst are the ones who are able to gain power. But that's a conversation for another day. But that's part of why I think there's a disconnect between how I fundamentally believe that people are good and that most people would help people in a situation and I think that you see this when apocalyptic things happen, when huge natural disasters happen. Are there bad people who do bad things? Yes. But the fact of the matter is, like, a lot of people band together, and part of this comes back to my overall politics of that people are fundamentally good, and that society can build itself back through people working together. I firmly believe that is how humanity works, and that is a future that would be better than the trajectory on which we currently find ourselves, where we are led by the absolute worst of the worst on all sides. But I am with you that I do like a lot of it. I like the Mad Max series. I saw Fury Road like 4 or 5 times in the theater because that movie slaps. It is so cool. And I like the other ones too. I like the original Mad Max. I know it is one of the least popular, I think, of the series, but I like that one because it shows the breakdown. At the start of that movie, the apocalypse hadn't happened yet. The apocalypse happens off screen during the course of that film, essentially. And I think that is really interesting. Yeah. But ultimately, I think that there is... I like when post-apocalyptic media can be a little more hopeful, or even just apocalyptic media. I think that we talked about this off mic. We didn't talk about on mic, but 2 of my favorite books of all time are Octavia Butler's Earthseed series. So Parable of the Sower is the first one, and then Parable of the Talents is the second one. And they're uncomfortable to read sometimes because you can see the parallels in the breakdown to society that we are currently experiencing. I remember I read Parable of the Sower actually when I was at my very first Comic-Con in like 2015, I guess it was the summer of 2016 was the very first Comic-Con I went to, and I was reading Parable of the Sower, and there is a man running for president in Parable of the Sower whose campaign slogan is "Making America Great Again."
Oh my God.
And he's a xenophobic bigot monster. And so it was really surreal to be there in San Diego, taking breaks in between all of these panels I'm going to and all this stuff I'm seeing, and reading this book while in the throes of the 2016 presidential election, where we have an absolute bigot monster running for president whose slogan is "Make America Great Again." Yeah. And so that series makes me uncomfortable, and there's a lot of brutality, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of people, of society falling apart, but ultimately that series also has a hopeful bent to it because something that is better starts to be built, and I think that is one of the reasons why I love that series so much. And granted, I like just about everything Octavia Butler wrote. I didn't care much for Kindred. I didn't care much for Fledgling, but just about everything in between those two I really like. But I still think her 2 very best works are Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents because they feel so prescient, but also envision a world that can be built that is better than the one that we are in from the ashes of the world that we are currently in, Yeah. So I really like that series. Highly recommended. If anyone has not read the Parable books, read the Parable books. They're very, very good. Anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I wish it's one of those genres that I think is more and more present as the future seems so fraught, but I like when things are a little more hopeful. And I hope that we see more of that without devolving. Don't get me started on hope punk as a pseudo genre because nothing makes me want to puke more. But because there's a difference between there's a difference between being hopeful and the performative grossness of hope punk, but that's neither here nor there. I like when post-apocalyptic futures and something that is post-apocalyptic can be imagined. What happens after the fall, after the post-apocalyptic rebuild? What do we do in this post-apocalyptic scenario?
Yeah.
I
agree.
One of my favorite examples of that media is, are you familiar with the podcast Friends at the Table at all?
No.
I don't. There was a time when I really started to get into actual play podcasts, and then I soured on literally all of them with the exception of Friends at the Table, which is the only actual play podcast I'll still listen to in 2022. The rest of them I'm like, wash my hands of you. You're all terrible. Because it's boring to hear other people play D&D. Like, just play it yourself. It's more fun. Sorry, Critical Role, you're not very good. But Friends at the Table is really good. And I think that part of the thing that I like about them so much is that they're not using very common systems. They use lesser known but still really robust role-playing systems for their games. But they have a series called Seasons in Hyron that is their first, third, and fifth seasons of the show altogether that are set in this post-apocalyptic kind of fantasy world, sort of like Shannara. I was going to say Shannara because I hate myself.
I noticed.
But sort of Shannara.
I heard it almost slipping.
I was the pedant who, after I met Terry Brooks and he said, "It said Shannara," I drilled into my brain, even though I hated the way that it sounded, that's how you say it, so sometimes it still leaks out of my brain.
And I remember you telling me that because you went to a book signing with a copy of a book for me because I couldn't make it. And you got that book signed. And then you told me that that's how he said it. And I did the exact opposite, is I just sort of expunged that memory from my head as much as possible and said, nope, it is Shannara. It will always be Shannara.
You said death of the author.
Yes.
Well, it was the right thing to do because Shannara sounds way better. I bet that's what they said in the TV show. I never watched it because who has time to watch TV shows? Right. But I bet they said Shannara in the TV show.
I sure hope so.
Because Shannara is terrible sounding. But anyway, post-apocalyptic, their seasons or their show Seasons in Hyron is about this group of adventurers in this post-apocalyptic world, and you eventually see another apocalypse happen, and then the world that is built out of that apocalypse, and it is so much more generative rather than restrictive or static. That's what I'll say. Because, a lot of post-apocalyptic worlds, like you said, it seems like everything falls apart and then it's just static afterwards.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I really like about Spring in Hyron, the end of the Hyron series, and the way that it resolves itself is that it is a post-apocalyptic situation that is extremely generative, and you see societies rebuild themselves. You see them, make agreements with other societies. You see the way that people would build something again in a situation like that. So I really would recommend Friends at the Table if someone was looking for a podcast to listen to. I wouldn't maybe start with Autumn and Hyron because the sound quality is not very good for that very first season. I would maybe start with one of the later sci-fi seasons that they did in between the fantasy post-apocalyptic world. But I think that show specifically grapples with a lot of these questions, but they come to conclusions, I think, more in lines with what my ethics and politics would hope for a future than what I see in a lot of the other post-apocalyptic media.
Cool.
So, check it out. It's really good. I think, like I say, it's the only people playing an RPG podcast that I can stand to listen to still in the year of our Lord 2022. So, it is what it is. But I guess we should start wrapping up. Are there any last thoughts, I guess, on the genre of post-apocalyptic stuff? Are there any things coming up that you're excited about that are kind of in that genre? Or any avenues of things that you're like, I've been meaning to get to that, but I haven't yet. Maybe I should.
So I'm going to say that I am going to consider the next Mass Effect game to be post-apocalyptic, and I am looking forward to that. Because at the end of Mass Effect
they
trilogy,
do
that. Where else? It doesn't matter which ending you choose. It is an apocalyptic ending. So I would say there's that. I honestly don't really know of that much that's coming. Especially the last little bit, things have just been busy enough that I haven't been plugged into a lot of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But it's a genre that I think has a lot of potential. And I think a lot of the things, not everything, but a lot of the entries in this sort of genre of entertainment just don't reach the potential that they could. And that's what I would love to see, is I would love to see people taking the idea of post-apocalyptic entertainment, of a post-apocalyptic world, and pushing it a little bit more. It just feels like, in many ways, and again, not always, but in many ways, it has been a kind of a stagnant thing for a while. And I would like to see people stretching it a little bit, pushing it a little bit, and making us think about the idea of post-apocalyptic media in a different way than we have been. Because again, so much of it tends to feel samey to me.
Yeah. I am with you. I don't know. I too hope to see new things. I hope to see some growth there and doing something different. And I just don't know that we're going to get it, but I hope for it.
Yeah, that's all we can do, I guess.
Because I can't, I have neither the ability nor the money to make my own media. So I got to hope that what comes out is good. And if it's not, I can always go back and watch Escape from New York. Because you know what movie rules? Escape from New York. You know who makes good movies? John Carpenter. Did you know that? John Carpenter makes a good movie.
You know, he's got some experience making movies.
I know you're not a big horror fan, so you probably haven't seen Halloween or The Thing. But The Thing is
Do you want to know why I hate horror so much?
Is it because of The Thing?
Because our dear, thoughtful father thought that it would be appropriate for me at the age of 8 years old to watch The Thing with him while our mother was working nights at the hospital.
Well,
I have been forever scarred by watching The Thing at a young age.
Rules. That's fair. That's very fair.
So yeah, I've seen The Thing. It still creeps me out to this day.
It's I think it's one of the greatest movies ever made. It's pinnacle of horror and science fiction cinema. It rules. But I also understand where if you saw it as a young age, and see, I think that I like horror because I was a little bit older. I saw the first Evil Dead movie at 14 or 13, 14. It was a Halloween. It was right after I was not allowed to go trick-or-treating anymore. So I got together with my friends. We went to Blockbuster to rent a movie, and we were all underage. So it's not like we could rent rated R movies. But do you know what you could rent at Blockbuster if you were not 17? Unrated movies.
Aha.
So we rented Evil Dead, which is not rated because when they tried to rate it, it got an X. And so they said, never mind, we'll release it without rating. Really good, really well thought out policy there, Blockbuster. Real good job giving 13-year-olds access to that extremely gory, extremely violent, filled with nudity movie, Evil Dead. But I was old enough that I think it made a positive impression on me, and I was like, man, horror movies are pretty fun, huh?
There you go.
So I really like The Thing. But Escape from New York, it's also really good. Post-apocalyptic. Snake Plissken is in it. How can you not win with a main character whose name is Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell with an eye patch?
Tis true.
Anyway, we should wrap things up. We both got to go to bed. But it was fun to talk about this stuff with you and to think a little bit about post-apocalyptic media. And we will be back in 2 weeks with our next great adventure in the summer, the waning summer of X, with X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Which makes me think we're not going to have to think nearly as hard about that topic as we may have had to think about this one.
Oh, I think so too. I think that we'll both come in and be like, oh, this movie was so dumb. I think that that's how we're going to come in. I think it'll come in real hot, and I think we'll talk about how dumb a movie it is, and it should be fun.
I agree.
But we'll be back in 2 weeks with that. So yeah, let's wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, you can shoot us an email at the email that Peter can say here.
feedback@themiddleofculture.com.
I did get some feedback from a friend about X3, but I'll save it for our next X-Men episode. We were texting about it, and he was like, here's my thoughts on your episode and on X3 as a movie. And he made some really good points that I think are worth bringing up. So we'll talk about that.
I look forward to hearing
about
that. Perfect.
And leave a review. Give us 5 stars. Give us a kiss on the cheek. Whatever you want to do. Maybe even a kiss on the forehead. That's somehow that feels more intimate than a kiss on the cheek. I don't know why.
I don't either, but I think you're right. So
anyway, thank you all for listening. Have a great evening or day. Thanks, or whenever you're listening. Bye.
Bye.